Hi everyone, so I thought I'd make another quick video about Wavetable, and I wanted to kind of like show you some of the possibilities that Wavetable can bring for maybe a slightly more aggressive sort of lead sounds, some bass sounds, slightly drum and bassy stuff. And Wavetable is actually really capable, and there's quite a lot of things that you can do which you might have not tried. So I'm just going to share a couple of things that I find very, very useful. So I've got a drum bass beat here I recorded ages ago just to serve me as a basis for sound, right? And obviously when we go over to Wavetable, the nicest thing is obviously is that we can add a sub oscillator, obviously, right? So that's going to give you an interesting sort of sound from the get-go, because you can add nice sort of beefy low end, right? Other things as well that can be quite useful as well is the fact that we can experiment with the different sort of wave shapes here. I quite like some of these, like FM feedback can be quite interesting as well, especially if you add some movement, for example, with the envelope, right? You can see that here, the envelope 2. We can apply that to the position, and we can set that to negative values if we wanted to, so you can, right, so we can have that going, right, and then obviously we can go a little bit lower, and we can play around with FM modulation, right? And we can play around with different values and see what sort of makes it a little bit more interesting. Obviously, if it's like 50%, 25%, it's going to sound okay. And we can apply, you can see, we can click on the amount here, and we can apply movement by Lfos, for example. Right, and that's going to give us quite a big sort of sound. So the other technique that I quite like with Wavetable is obviously, you know, we can add more voices, and I quite like the noise, right? If we're looking to create a sort of like aggressive sound, we can't slow down the rate, right? And that's just going to give you like a really intense sort of sound. Right, so it becomes bright and not so bright. But the other thing as well that can be quite cool is routing an LFO to modulate the rate of another LFO. So then you can create some really interesting movement that you might not be able to get otherwise. So for example, if I click on the LFO1 rate, which is just right here, I can here I can go to LFO1 rate, and I can assign LFO2 instead. So obviously it's a bit too fast, and I can slow it down, and I can also change the shape, and I can play around with the different shapes here. Maybe speed it up a little bit, and I can also make it so it's not so in your face. There you go, right? Right, which is really cool. And we can have that going. Right, and I can have that note playing. Actually, I should have hit the record. There you go. And one of the things I like to do as well when you got some sort of bass line like this is obviously you got the note in there, and then I can then fiddle around with the actual sound design per se, right? So I don't have to worry too much, because there's one thing I find really annoying sometimes, and I don't know if you guys will agree with this, is actually creating sounds from scratch while you're just kind of like randomly playing on your keyboard. Sometimes it's not the best, and sometimes to fine-tune the sound it's just better to have just the one note, and then you can start experimenting with it, right? And I find that that's kind of like the fastest and most interesting way to kind of like just make things sound more organic and fuller, right? Right, so for example, I could maybe speed up the rate here. Right, or I could maybe increase the LFO to amount to LFO1 rate. right? Or I could make it maybe like a slightly more, you know, like a triangle, or maybe I could use this square, so it's like really in your face. Right, and I can make it more subtle by just decreasing this amount, so it's not so full on. Right, so lots of fun can be had just literally by playing around with the Lfos. And the other thing as well that can be even more interesting, if you ever feel like it, is obviously we can modulate the rate of LFO2 that at the same time is modulating LFO1. I'm just going to change it to the other one. Yeah, quite like that as well. Maybe just play around with this for a minute. Like that, for example, that can be quite cool. And you can see just like literally having one LFO going into the other, it's just going to give you that slight sort of shuffle. And that can be really cool. And obviously we can go over to the overall gain if we want. So we can click on the volume to the amp there. And at the moment it's set to velocity, but we don't have to do that. And we can say maybe LFO1 to affect the amp. Right, so we don't hear that constant sap underneath. You know, it's also cutting this sap, which can be quite cool. And obviously with the envelope 3 here, we can, if we wanted to, we can click on the LFO2 rate and then say, okay, envelope 3 is going to control the rate, for example. Right, or I can make it so it takes longer. And I can bring maybe the FM amount so it's not on your face. Right, so we can have some interesting movement that way. Then, if we want to take it up a notch, we can add another oscillator, of course, and we can play around with different sort of collections of noise, wavetables that we can choose from. It really depends. Sometimes when it gets too complex, it can get a little bit too full on. But you know, let's try with this menace one and maybe just apply the same thing. So it's quite useful because we can go over to the wavetable position here and we can actually kind of mirror it up. Like you can see on oscillator 1 position, I've got envelope, so I can do the same thing. So it's quite easy to kind of copy it if we wanted to. And again, I'm just going to put it like around the same. And also, maybe I could use, I don't know, I just leave it like that for now, see what it sounds like. Maybe just bring that few semitones up, see if that gets, see if we can actually really hear the second oscillator. And maybe we could apply FM as well to that one and say that to maybe 25% instead. And the amount, I'm just going to say that to 50%. And we could then copy what we did before. So you can see that the FM amount is the LFO1. So I'm going to do the same thing here. And I think that should do. Obviously, because the FM is so strong, it kind of like almost becomes like noise. And we can play around with the sap and just change the tone as well. Or we could do other stuff, right? Like we got envelope 3 here, it's not doing, well, it's affecting the airflow rate, so I just leave it like that. Or we could also set velocity to affect different things if we wanted to. It's literally endless. Obviously, we can then play around with the filter, and this is another thing I really love, is the fact that we can use, for example, a high pass filter, and we can use the MS-20. Make that filter so it's trackable, right? So you can actually set the filter to note, right? So that means that the notes is going to basically affect the frequency of that filter, and we can add a lot of resonance. And I can play around with the MS-20 filter and just give it a lot of low end. right? For example, maybe the tuning on that's a little bit too strong. Right? So sky's the limit, and we can change different aspects of that. Maybe I can change the shape. Maybe that sound is a bit too high. I'm just gonna play around with like maybe 0 semitones. I don't like that. Oh, that could be alright. Let's just set that to 0. Or we could also set the LFO, the envelope to. We could, if we wanted to affect the volume of oscillator 2 as well, so it comes in gradually. And we can change the basic waveform, right? Let me just check the time. Cool. We can also change the basic waveform. We can maybe play around with this one. Actually, the more complex it is, then if it's too complex, if we apply FM, it's not going to be great, isn't it? It's just going to sound a little bit too full on. But I think that's not too bad for a sound. Maybe I will ease that oscillator 2 off a little bit. Right, and we can make that mono. There you go, right? So that's one way that we can create some different sort of sounds with Wavetable by using, for example, LFO routings and playing around with some of the possibilities such as FM. So I hope you enjoyed this one, and we'll catch up very soon. If you've got any requests, as I said, just let us know in the comments below. And thanks for subscribing as well, and we'll see you very soon. Cheers, guys.